Half-Life is a game that is undeniably best enjoyed with a keyboard and a mouse. That's something that's been true since the game was released all the way back in 1998. Playing Half-Life on the PC wasn't just the best way to play, it was the only way to play. That remained true until about a couple of years after its release when, thanks to the efforts of Gearbox Software, an official port finally came to the console. But despite technically only having one official console port, there are actually quite a few wacky ways to play Half-Life 1. It's nowhere near Doom in terms of the sheer amount of hardware you can play this thing on, but I think you'll find there's a lot more ways to play the original Half-Life than you previously thought. Let's start off first talking about official ports. You know, things that were actually sanctioned by Valve and won't get you 10 to 20 years in prison for playing. The first and only console port ever released for the original Half-Life was the PlayStation 2 version made by Gearbox Software. This sucker came out in the year 2001, and as far as ports go, was actually kinda good. This was the only way to play Half-Life in 2001 if you didn't have a PC, and all things considered, you really weren't missing out on much, besides autosaving. You were definitely missing out on autosaving. Obviously, the controls also sucked pretty bad in comparison to the precision of a mouse and a keyboard, but the auto-aiming feature sorta makes up for it. You know, sorta. Beyond arthritis in your hands from having to play Half-Life 1 with a DualShock controller, there are also a few more things console players got that PC players didn't. Like, for example, an entire co-op game called Half-Life Decay. I won't explain Half-Life Decay to you in too much detail, but it's the only official co-op Half-Life experience in the entire series. It's also a lot of fun and has a PC port, so I recommend you at least play it.
We can suck the bull squid.
Wow.
We can suck its juices.
The other cool things that those PC dorks missed out on are cheat codes. See, during this era of console gaming, it was almost unheard of to not ship your game with cheat codes. Fucking GTA 3 had it. Even basketball games had cheat codes. While all the generic ones are here, like God Mode and Infinite Ammo, there's also fucking Alien Mode, where you play through Half-Life as a fucking Vortigaunt. What? Gearbox could have just ported over No Clip and God Mode to the PS2, and I would have been happy with that, but they gave us Alien Mode. It wasn't just cheats and worse aim though. The PS2 version has graphical improvements that even the most die-hard of PC guys wouldn't mind having. I could sit here and, you know, pretend like I know what I'm talking about, but I'm going to kick it over to my homie Richter Overtime to tell you all about Half-Life PS2.
Good evening. It's weird to think that in a lot of ways, the PS2 port of Half-Life is the most definitive way to experience the game, especially in terms of visuals. You might recognize that the models used in the port are much higher quality than those that the original Half-Life shipped with. On the PC, people regularly get into stupid-ass debates about whether the low-def or these high-def models are better. But what's curious about the PS2 version is that the models present, especially the character models, are actually even higher quality than the HD models available on the PC. Characters have Source-esque finger posing and even face posing, a huge leap from the lazy mouth flapping of the PC variants. They have a higher polygon count, and the scientist models even have translucent glasses, you know, so poor Walter can see out of them. The PS2 also has its own exclusive turret models for some reason. In terms of environments, the PS2 port also has a ton of altered content that never officially made its way to the PC version. First and foremost, a good chunk of textures have been altered to look more realistic. Most noticeably are the iconic cliffside textures, which now look a lot less like netherrack / some guy's scabbed knee and a lot more like actual rocks. Curiously, the cliffside skybox has been color adjusted to better match the hue of these new textures, but not the regular outdoor skyboxes. Boy, I hope somebody got fired for that blunder. The signs you pass by in the halls of Black Mesa have also been redone in higher quality, making use of the new HD characters. The HEV and health chargers have been completely pimped out and look awesome.
These prove that the Gearbox games aren't canon, by the way.
And the shitty brush-based SUVs that appear throughout the game have been replaced with much better-looking SUV models. There's also some changes to the map's layouts as well, presumably to help accommodate the game's new control scheme. For one, the beginning of Office Complex has been completely mutated. The area where you drop down into power up has been flooded with water to stop the player from getting soft lock from fall damage. The last section of residue processing has had an additional valve puzzle added for some reason. The trash compactor Gordon gets thrown in has been redesigned because Gearbox was going to use it in a cut mission from Half-Life Decay. And there might be some other small tweaks I'm forgetting, but I think that's most of them. As for skips and glitches, a lot have been patched out. I was devastated to find that the Office Complex elevator skip doesn't work, and that you can no longer stand on trip mines to skip power up, but at least the infinite health door glitch and the We've Got Hostile skip work. The long jump module has been basically turned into a double jump, though you can still activate it traditionally if you want to do a weird crouch crank on your controller. The head-to-head deathmatch mode also features multiple exclusive DM maps that never made it to the PC officially. They're all pretty clearly designed with small player counts in mind though. There's Office, built from a part of the Office Complex chapter, Signal, built from a part of the Half-Life Decay chapter Code Green, Skirmish, Debris, and Water Canal, all based on parts of Surface Tension, and finally Basement and Waypoint, which from what I can tell are completely original levels. And if that's not enough for you, the deathmatch mode also lets you play as the best girl in the entire series. Also, the training course has been redone with a new intro showing Black Mesa's laissez-faire approach to policy enforcement, and a new sequence designed to teach the player about the lock-on system. Now, all you fucking nerds go to the comments and start arguing about whether this implies the canonical existence of an aim assist system in the HEV suit. Thanks for having me on, Mr. Lauber. But for now, this is where I get off.
Hey, bro, really, I'm telling you, it's time to choose, bruh. It's time to choose.
Well, damn. That was a whole lot of information, Mr. Overtime, and for good reason. The PS2 version of Half-Life is the only official Half-Life port that was released, so you'll have to excuse this section being a little bit longer than the others. It's weird to think, though, as much as a phenomenon that Half-Life is, the only official way to play it on a console is one from 20 years ago. Now we're getting into Section 2, which is frankly nasty-ass territory. We're getting into cancelled port territory. The first and perhaps most notorious cancelled Half-Life port is the Dreamcast version. Like I said earlier, the Dreamcast version was effectively done before it was cancelled. How done, you ask? Prima Strategy Guide done. You'd expect the Dreamcast version to just be a shitty port of the PS2 version, but this thing actually had its own unique charm to it. Half-Life Blue Shift was actually originally made exclusively for the Dreamcast port. Also, the way you enter cheats in this game is pretty interesting. There's 3 big wheels of words, and you combine them into phrases to access levels. For example, We Got Hostiles is Soldiers Go to Black Mesa, Anomalous Materials is Gordon Goes to Work, and Zen is Fear and Gravity. It's also worth mentioning this game controls like complete dog doo-doo, and the Dreamcast only had one analog stick, so I don't know if you ever try to play a first-person shooter on the PSP, but it's somehow worse than that. I see why Gearbox put fucking the aim hacks in this game. The Dreamcast version also has a pretty cool homebrew scene going for it. People actually got USS Darkstar and They Hunger working on this port, and from what I can tell, they run pretty well. The Dreamcast version was also poised to have a bunch of Sega-specific references in it, something that would have never been done on the PlayStation, like, for example, every time you break a crate, a Japanese copy of Sonic Adventure for the Dreamcast would come out. What the fuck? As far as the Dreamcast version goes, it certainly is interesting, but not really interesting enough to talk about at length, unfortunately. They did completely redo the models, though. For example, Gordon looks like a Redditor, and Gina Cross looks like... what the fuck? Now, I hate to end this section too soon, but well, I did anyway, so let's move on to the final and perhaps most interesting section, which are unofficial ports. Before we even get started with this, I don't want to mislead you people. Alright, most if not all of these ports are pretty much the same version running on Zash 3D, I guess, which from my understanding is a reverse engineered version of Gold Source. This is like a bunch of smart guy shit, so I can't really tell you exactly what the hell this means, but I figured I'd mention it anyways. I just want to be clear here in saying that these are all effectively the same game. With that out of the way though, let's talk about the absurd ass ways you can play Half-Life 1. On your phone, on your Android phone, on your PS Vita, on your Nintendo 3DS, man, what the hell? The PS Vita version is probably the definitive portable Half-Life experience for now. The 3DS version is like a joke. I don't know why you'd subject yourself to this, you know? I guess the Zash 3D versions technically aren't ports because they're not running on Gold Source, but whatever. Also, it's been my experience that there are ways you can tinker with this to get this being better than retail Half-Life. There are sound mods, HD mods, flashlight mods. It's interesting how much this game can vary from one version to the next. Even the Steam release and WAN version have huge differences that have been cataloged at length. It's also weird how much exclusive content is locked behind an inaccessible or unreleased version of the game. Maybe this isn't possible or worth anyone's time, but I'd love to see a definitive Gearbox release of Half-Life 1, bringing through all the Gearbox features across platforms into one solid build of Half-Life on Steam. You know, the Steam version of Half-Life is great, but you know, it also kind of sucks, so I know that'll never happen, and Valve will probably never touch Half-Life 1 again, but, you know, I can dream about it. Well, I'd like to wrap this video up with some honorable mentions. Namely that Half-Life 2 has some interesting ports as well. This fucking god-awful original Xbox port was actually the first time I ever played Half-Life 2, believe it or not. And also Half-Life 2 technically has a NVIDIA Shield port, which is like, that's cool. You've probably also recently seen videos of Half-Life 2 running on the Switch thanks to the Portal port that just came out for the Nintendo Switch, but I don't know, maybe Valve will release a Half-Life collection on the Switch a week after I put this video out just to piss me off, you know? Finally, I'd like to give a bit of a shout out to supadupaplex here on YouTube, who's been tinkering with the PS2 version of Half-Life in really cool ways, including porting the entirety of both Blue Shift and Opposing Force to it, which is fucking crazy. Well, that's basically it, you know. I hope you enjoyed this wacky deep dive into Half-Life 1's crazy ports. I'm awesome as hell, and I rule, and I'm very cool. Goodbye.
Talk